Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be with you again this week. My goodness, we're just a few days away from the 2024 general election. A record number of Oklahomans have already cast their ballots. When last I checked, we were approaching 200,000. I have every belief that we will surpass 200,000 votes cast early voting. That does not include mail ballots. We don't have those numbers yet. But it remains to be seen on what impact, if that is indicative of turnout this year, or if that is just people shifting things around. There's a lot that you can't tell from early voting. What you can tell is this many people have voted. In Oklahoma, we happen to know their party affiliation based on registration, but we don't know who they're voting for, right? We don't actually tally up the votes until election night at 7 p.m. So when you see the news about early vote, be encouraged. That means that 200,000 Oklahomans were interested and excited enough to vote that they went early. This was the first election that we had early voting on Wednesday, and we had like 80,000 votes cast that day. That's phenomenal, right? And then another 80-ish thousand yesterday. And when I looked at it today at 12:30, we had already had about 40,000, which tells me we're probably going to get about 80,000 again today. And then tomorrow it's going to rain. So I'm not super optimistic on Saturday's turnout. Also Saturday, you can only early vote 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. So just less hours available as well. But this is good news. This tells me two things. One, this tells me that Oklahomans like to vote early, and we should expand early voting, right? If voters are making use of it, and I looked back at the last 3 presidential cycles for which early voting data was available. The state election board has it up through 2012, but not before that. So 2008 and earlier, they don't break it out as easily. And so, the early voting has increased every time. It was about 9% in 2012, and then it was up maybe like 8.5%, and then it was like 10.4%, and then 10.7% in 2016 and 2020, respectively. What those numbers mean to you and I is that on average, as far as we can tell, like somewhere around 9 to 10% of total votes cast will be cast early. I think this year might be a bit of an outlier, as it has been an outlier in any number of ways, though, because if that's the case, and if we expect turnout to also be higher, then 10% would be just huge, right? We would have turnout, golly, if 200,000 votes is 10% of the actual turnout, that would mean turnout is like 2 million, which would be bananas. Absolute bananas. That's not going to happen. Surely, right? Don't never say never, but what I suspect is happening is that a lot of the voters who normally vote absentee by mail are not doing that this year, and instead they were voting early. I also think there are more people who typically vote on election day who decided to vote early this year. And they're doing this for a few reasons. One, the weather's been nice. Honestly, it's been pretty nice. And so why not? Two, they see the news about people around the country voting early. Because remember, a lot of states have been voting for weeks. We're kind of late to the party on this. And when you see the rest of the country voting, you want to get on it too, right? So I think a lot of folks are voting early. And so we're really just shifting people from one date to another and not necessarily adding new voters. And I've done a very cursory analysis of just looking at, likely voters and some people kind of in the database that we maintain. And that seems to be supported by the data. Now, we won't really know until election day. And that's really why I'm doing this episode today. I know last week when we had Keith Gaddy on, I said we probably wouldn't do another episode before the election, but I've been sitting here in the office all afternoon, kind of looking at data and feeling anxious, and I decided to get on the microphone to be with all of you. And I want to talk just briefly about what to expect on election night, what to expect afterwards, and then what to do if you have problems or you know someone's having problems voting on election day. And then friends, we're going to talk a little bit about self-care. That's really probably my biggest reason for doing an episode today. And maybe this is one of those episodes where I'm talking to myself and I'm justifying it by talking to all of you. So you get in on that. What to expect on election night. This is stuff that I'm sure that you know, but I'm reiterating it so that it is fresh in your mind and so that you can tell others, right? This is your opportunity, listeners, to be emissaries of truth, right? You're little outposts, little bastions of truth and information for voters in your area. So whether you live in Oklahoma City or Tulsa or Wilburton or Ponca City or anywhere else in the state. I named those small towns because I met some really great people from those cities this week, and they're fresh on my mind. But wherever you are, Weatherford, Godebo, Guyman, Boise City, Beaver, Slap Out, whatever, you have the chance to be a light post for democracy in your community. And you can do that in a completely nonpartisan and earnest way by reminding people a few things. One, Oklahoma has the best, the most secure and solid election system in the country. That is not to disparage any other state. I don't get to tout Oklahoma as being the best in a lot of things, but on this we are, right? Oklahoma has the exact same make and model voting machine in every precinct. Every precinct in the whole state uses paper ballots. They put it into that, vote counter 1000 or whatever the name of the machine is, and they tabulate it. None of our voting machines are connected to the internet. They cannot be accessed from outsiders by Russia or anybody else. It is all just locally run and operated, and everything is backed up with paper ballots. And that's a lot of work, and it's a lot of peace of mind, I'll be honest. There are some other states that do it differently. Some states have different machines in different counties, and they have all these different systems. Some people use touch screens, and you can understand where people might get a little squeamish about this. So that's not the case in Oklahoma. We have exceptionally safe and secure, valid election machines. Now, I say that. I also want to reiterate that voting in America, regardless of where you are, is extremely safe and extremely trustworthy, right? So even in states that might use different machines, by golly, they have put them through their paces to make sure that everything is safe and secure. They do that anyway, but after all the kerfuffle in 2020 and shortly thereafter, you're damn sure they did it this year, right? A lot of places changed machines to be like ours, to be paper ballots, be backed up. America's election system is, by and large, safe and secure and well run. Voter fraud is exceedingly rare, almost never. I mean, literally, a dozen cases over the last 3 billion votes cast. It's so small that it is vanishingly possible. It just doesn't happen. So I know that some people out there are already kind of trying to drip information. And I'm sure on election day, you will see tweets and news stories that are allegations of voter fraud or things happening. And just know that some people are trying to sow discord and sow disbelief into our news systems and to our election systems. And they are on the wrong side of history, and they are on the wrong side of truth. So your job is to say, that's not true. This is how things happen. And to go to primary sources, wait for solid reporting from local on-the-ground reporters who have a chance to look into it and not just report the headline, but actually do an investigation and find out what's up, right? So, rule number 1, expect some people acting a fool and expect that they're wrong. That's not the way it works in America. It's not the way it works in Oklahoma. The election's going to be fine. Number 2, on election night, here in Oklahoma, the polls will close at 7 p.m. and counting votes will start right after that. They will start by tallying up all of the early vote numbers and all the absentee ballots. They'll start running those through to count them up while every precinct begins to shut down their machines and start counting the votes in their precincts and reporting those into their counties and from the county into the state. It usually takes about 30 minutes before we get the first round of data. Usually it's around 7:30 or so. And those first vote totals typically reflect the early voting and the absentee voting. And then after that begins the somewhat slower trickle of numbers coming in from all of the precincts and all the counties, right? Everyone will have a big surge of emotion around 7:30, 7:45, and those first numbers come in. Cooler heads will prevail and say, hey, it's going to be a long night. There's a lot of information we don't have yet. So just wait, right? If you're checking it online, if you're watching the local news, whatever, just know that it's going to, it'll come in when it comes in. Around, 10:30 or so is usually 10 o'clock, 10:30. By then in Oklahoma, we usually know the outcome of our elections here. We will not know the outcome of the presidential election, right? It's unlikely that we will know the outcome of the presidential election by then. For one, because voting, polls close at different times in different states, and we're in the middle of the country in the central time zone. There are 2 whole ass time zones to the west of us that will still be voting for several hours after we're done, including, California, which has 40 million people. So maybe we should be patient. The news stations are going to be exceptionally guarded this year and making sure that they only call states when they are very confident that a particular candidate is going to win a state. If they are not sure, they're not going to call it. The rush to call things first is a distant second to the need to be accurate, right? This was another point of kerfuffling in 2020, and I think modalities have changed, approach has changed. So again, be patient. We'll watch. They'll call a bunch of states early. They'll call Oklahoma early because reasons, right? Because we've historically voted substantially for the Republican candidate. We expect that'll be the case this year as well. So they'll probably call Oklahoma at 7:01 p.m. as soon as polls close. That's okay, right? They're going to be much more cautious about calling swing states, about calling Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, maybe even Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, right? There's a lot of states they're going to hold off on. There will be a lot of conversation about polling. Were the polls right? Were they wrong? What did they miss? What did they get right? Again, patience is a virtue that we should all foster. We will have more data in the days and weeks after the election. There is reason to believe that polls might be more accurate this year. There's reason to believe they might not be. Most of the experts that I read and listen to have reiterated the point that polling is never 100% accurate, right? Just like, weather forecasting is not 100% accurate. They can give you a good indication if it's going to rain or not, but whether or not it rains at your house is a much harder thing to gauge. And the same applies with polling, right? They take a snapshot of the electorate and then infer some outcomes from that. When you take all of the polls, add it together and kind of average and look at them collectively, you get a better picture of what's really happening, but it's still not 100% certain of what happens on election day. Typically, there is a polling error, right? Like they're going to miss it by, on average, 3 to 4 points. But it is impossible to predict which direction, right? They might underestimate, they might overestimate Republicans or Democrats, and we don't know until afterwards. It also, if you look back in history, there's always a polling error, but there is no rhyme or reason why it's a certain way, so you can't predict, right? It's not like every year they overestimate Democrats. They have the last 2 cycles, and so you might think, well, they'll do it again. But you also might think, but maybe they corrected. And what if they overcorrected and went too far? So we'll wait and see, right? There's a lot of factors that make polling really, really hard to do. And so good pollsters have been very guarded on their methodology. They've been transparent about their methodology, but very guarded on trying to fiddle with stuff too much in hopes that they're gambling to be right. They would rather be certain on where they're at, right? They're incentivized. Pollsters are honestly incentivized to be correct, right? There's no money in being a pollster who's wrong all the time. No one will hire you. And so they want to be as right as they can. Also, after the election, right? So maybe it's Wednesday morning, maybe it's Thursday, maybe it's Friday, maybe we don't have results yet. Again, that's fine. It's okay. I would rather take some time and be right than be first and be wrong. Wouldn't you? Undoubtedly, based on what we're seeing already, there will be calls from voters and perhaps from candidates about voter fraud, alleging inaccuracies, all just, whatever you're imagining people are going to say, they're going to say. There's going to be a lot of stuff thrown around. Don't listen to it. Just wait. All you can do, friends, is cast your vote and make sure that you remind your friends and neighbors to vote as well. That's it. That's your job, to vote and help others vote. And the rest of that, just take a breath. If you're listening to this, there's a good chance that you are not going to be involved in litigation, right? You are going to be at home wondering what just happened to our country. The election, based on the polls, could go either way, right? Right now, both the major candidates are essentially tied, and with a standard polling error of 3 to 4%, that could mean a substantial win for either candidate, right? If the polling error happens to be 3 or 4 points in Harris's favor, then she might end up with, 300 plus electoral votes and really sweep several swing states and could have a commanding win. The same is roughly equally true the other direction though, right? Former President Trump, if the polling error is in his direction, 3 or 4 points, he could also win by 300 plus electoral votes. It might not come down to just one state, right? It looks like it's going to come down to Pennsylvania, but we don't know. Even just the last couple of days, polls have been tightening. The other day, I had a call with some colleagues around the country working in multiple states on some issues, and they said the same thing. It's honestly hard to tell. Their polling has also tightened. There's a couple of states they're confident about, but most of them, they said, it's too close to call. We're going to find out on election day. So I'm taking that as just a message from the universe to chill the fuck out. Just sit down. If you run into problems on election day, if you have questions, something seems funny, there's someone hanging around the polling place yelling at people, they told you weren't on the rolls, but you're very confident you're registered, something, don't give up, right? Let's take a few steps of things you can do. One, if you're at your polling place and you have some problem with the poll worker, there's a hierarchy there. I think the inspector is the position. There's someone that's the supervisor on site. If they can't help you, then together you can call the county election board and or the state election board and appeal to a higher authority and find out, right? Almost without fail, there is the option for you to cast a provisional ballot and do that, right? If something comes up, you should always cast a provisional ballot. Provisional ballots are ballots that you vote on. They set them aside. And then, honestly, they only count them if the race is really close, which kind of makes sense, right? If it's, within a point or so, then they make sure they count all those provisional ballots because those could sway the election. If it's just a route one way or the other, those ballots might not be as consequential, right? There's not that many of them, and there's rarely that many of them, but that's always an option. And so don't forget to bring your ID when you vote. Make sure your vote's cast. If they won't let you for some reason, find out why. And you can also always call the election board or the election protection hotline. This is a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit helpline. The phone number is 1-866-OUR-VOTE. That's 1-866-687-8683. I'm going to say it one more time so you can write it down. So grab a pen, a piece of paper, or your phone or whatever you got. Election Protection Hotline, 1-866-687-8683. If you'd rather go online, the website is very similar to the number. The website is 866-OUR-VOTE.org, right? They've been around for a long time. They've got experts for every state. Give them a call. They'll probably route you to someone at the ACLU here or some other attorney that knows what's up to answer questions, or they'll connect you with the election board, right? But they're a great asset. Please share that, post that, let people know. If you have problems, call this number, right? Let's not try to fight every fight on our own. Like, let's bring in the backup that is there for a reason. I don't expect you'll need it, but if you do, you've got it. On election night, as I said last week, I will be on Oklahoma City's Fox 25. If you are in the viewing area, tune in. I honestly don't know what it's going to be like. I'm going to get a haircut just in case, but I have never done anything like this before. I am equal parts excited and nervous. If you know me, I don't usually mind being in front of a crowd, but I am a bit nervous about this. And so we'll see what happens. If you aren't sure how to watch that, I'll tell you, on the regular old school over the air antenna, it's channel 25.1. That's how we watch local news at my house. If you have Cox, I believe it's channel 721. If you have AT&T, it's channel 1025. If you have DirecTV or Dish, it's just channel 25. You should be able to watch it on any of those. So it's channel OKC Fox 25. You can also go to okcfox.org, and you should be able to, I think you can maybe even stream it. I don't know. We'll find out. But please join in. I don't know. Make a bingo card. See if I say anything ridiculous on the air. I'm gonna try not to embarrass you, friends and listeners. And then one last note. And then again, I'm honestly talking to myself as much as I'm talking to you. We should all breathe, right? Take a deep breath. Unclench your jaw. Push your shoulders back. Remind yourself that everything's going to be okay. A lot of the rhetoric, a lot of the stress that is just latent in the air, that like existential dread about the election, has been weighing on a lot of us. And if you're someone who listens to a local podcast about Oklahoma politics, I'm going to guess you're one of these folks, right? That probably stresses about this stuff more than you should, right? And it's honestly because you care. I get it, but take another deep breath, straighten your back, put your feet on the floor, chant what you want to chant or whatever. Just know it's going to be okay. Regardless of what happens next Tuesday, America's going to persist. We have faced scarier foes. We have faced darker days than this. Every election is consequential for somebody, right? There are things that we all care about that matter, that are on the ballot. There are always good candidates and bad candidates and weird state questions that the legislature sent to the ballot and not the people. There are races where you feel like, there's no one. I don't really like any of these candidates. This is disappointing. And you still feel like you want to make the right call. That's the way it always is. Every election is like that. This one is no different. And regardless of who wins and who loses, America and this great experiment of democracy that we've been working on for 200 and almost 50 years will persist. And it persists because of people like you. It persists because of our willingness to show up even when our candidate loses and remain committed to building the future that we want. And I hope that whichever candidate wins and whichever candidate loses, that we move forward with a peaceful transition of power, and that no matter the outcome, we as the people of America find ways to build bridges, to strengthen our democracy, to move forward in a way that makes our republic stronger, more resilient, more inclusive, more fair, more representative, in big ways and small, in 2025, in 2026, and every year after that. This election is our chance to demonstrate to the world with our votes and our responses to the outcome that America is the greatest country in history. Or in the world. I don't know. I don't really care if we're the best. I think we're great. I think we're fine. I don't know why people are obsessed with us being the best. I just want us to be really good. Listeners, I believe that we are because of people like you. I believe that America's really great. It was great before. It'll be great again. Whatever turn of phrase you want to use, we could always be better, right? We're never there. We've never arrived. It's not over. But our commitment to being the best America we can, the best country we can, is what makes us the best. All right. All I have to say, take a deep breath. Relax. You don't have to watch the election results on Tuesday. You don't have to turn on the TV or check social media or look at anything all day. There is no law that says you have to do that. If you work in the industry, maybe you've got a different ball game, but for most of you, it's okay. All right. To play catch with your kids and to cook spaghetti and to play Scrabble and to, relegate the stress about this to the catacombs of your brain and not worry about it for a couple of days until we know what the outcome looks like. There is no shame in that. You are not a bad American. You're not a bad fixer, right? You don't have to stay uber connected to this stuff. If you have questions along the way, if you have concerns, if you have wonderings about what's happening as things develop, if something seems uncertain and you want to reach out to us, please do. I will, on your behalf, be tuned into this stuff. So you can send me an email, podcast@letsfixthis.org. If I don't know the answer, I'll either find it or I'll tell you, honestly, I don't know it and I don't know where to find it. But we'll do our best. The moment that I have any information that's useful, if we know an outcome or otherwise, I'll share it. I suspect we'll do a bit of a reaction pod next Wednesday, right after the election, just to update everyone on what we know at that point and what we don't. Maybe we'll get lucky. Maybe this will be a landslide one direction, and we'll come out of this a little more confident with what the future holds and move that way. I suggest we treat it like that anyway, right? And then life's a little bit more smooth. For most Oklahomans, you're going to get some rain this weekend. Enjoy that rain. Let it be a cleansing for your spirit and your lawn. Unless you're like me and your backyard is mostly dirt and your dog brings it into your house, in which case, stress over that instead of the election. It's a win-win. All right, folks. That's it for this week. This is officially our last episode before the podcast. Please vote if you haven't already. Please bring a friend. Tell your neighbors. Do that thing. And we'll talk to you on election night and a little after. Have a good weekend.